Hi, this is the video for Daf Yod of Masechet Ketubot. This is really one of my favorite dafim in perhaps the entire Masechet. Certainly one of my favorite dafim in this chapter, and it's because of these remarkable stories. These 6 stories in which a husband comes in front of a rabbi with a virginity claim, and in basically all of these stories his claim is denied. And I just want to talk for a minute about the role of these agadic types of stories in the context of a halachic conversation. There are a lot of times in the Talmud where we find the rabbis discussing in a very abstract manner a halachic principle or a halakha, some kind of matter of Jewish law, whether it's ritual law or civil law or marital law, whatever it might be. And when they discuss it, these discussions are usually based on older sources, on Mishnayot, on Braitot, other Tannaitic sources. They're based on reason, logic, comparing one source to another source, and various types of discussion that really, to a certain extent, are divorced from the consequences of these halachot on real people's lives. And then, oftentimes, what we find immediately following these halachic discussions, these abstract halachic discussions, are a series of stories which very frequently, remarkably, just ignore the halachic discussion, the abstract halachic discussion that preceded them. And it shows you a phenomenon that probably was common in the ancient world, that when cases came in front of judges, they didn't look to the abstract halacha, the abstract laws, whether they were biblical laws or other ancient Near Eastern laws. They basically decided many times, they decided these cases based on what they thought was right to do in those situations, which a lot of biblical scholars have shown this, also scholars of other ancient law in the ancient Near East. Basically, a judge was guided by tradition, and sometimes, although not always, a judge would be somewhat familiar with precedent and with tradition. But when cases came in front of the judge would decide based on his own reason, what he perceived to be fair in that given situation. And that's exactly what we see oftentimes in the Talmud. I'm not saying we never see rabbis adjudicating cases based on halakha, but a lot of times we see their actual practical decision-making is not based on halakha, it's based on their own intuitions. And that brings us to the question of why are these remarkable stories included in the Talmud? And what I'd like to suggest is that the Talmud itself is that type of book that's meant to be a guidance for future generations, for people for rendering decisions. Certainly, that was the way it was used subsequent to its composition. And when we think about it, a rabbi holding the Talmud or knowing the Talmud post the Talmudic period would have in his repertoire 2 corpuses of learning. One was the abstract discussions, and the other were the concrete decisions that rabbis had already made, that his predecessors had already made. And I think that gives him a lot more flexibility when coming to render a decision. I mean, think about the case of the virginity claims. We had all of this abstract halakha in which a husband's believability was increased, right? The Mishnah, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua, as we shall see later in the chapter, basically denied a husband the ability to make a virginity claim. Comes along Shmuel and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yehuda and other Amoraim and increase the ability for a husband to make a virginity claim. But then when we see all of these stories, we can see what happens to a husband when he comes and makes the virginity claim. Rav Nachman beats him. In another story, he's accused of being an ignoramus, right, walking around in the darkness. In another story, we have that weird test where they test the woman's virginity and it turns out that he's wrong. In another story, the clothes are washed and it turns out that she was still a virgin. In another story, we see that her family is from a family that does not have virginal or menstrual blood. In short, in all of these stories, the rabbi finds a way to make sure that he can say to this couple at the end, go out and merit your acquisition. In other words, continue to live as a husband and wife, despite the husband's suspicions that he wasn't, that the wife was not a virgin upon marriage. I think it's remarkable that the rabbis looked beyond the abstract halakha, as problematic as it is in this issue, and said, look here, the most important thing is to convey to the husband the message that his wife actually was a virgin, because we know it was an important value in those times, and to send them on their way so that they can begin a family and live together, hopefully happily, as a husband and a wife.